This is a summary of Estranged Labor, an excerpt from Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts of 1844. Karl Marx begins this excerpt by saying something along the lines of, okay, let's address something about the discipline of political economy. And he says something like, let's accept the dominant ideas like property exists and wages exist and rent exists. And he says if we take the ideas of political economy, then the worker is a commodity, something that is bought and sold on the market. He goes on to say that while the field of political economy has concepts like workers and wages, it does not explain to us what those things really mean, or in other words, what they do to society. For Marx, the ideas of political economy, in a way, reduce concepts to numbers and strips the concepts of their human aspect. For Marx, the ideas of political economy are biased since they take this stance that basically neglects human relations. Marx then states, since political economy has created this partial understanding of the economy, it is up to us to uncover and make known these aspects of the political economy like property, profit, and wages, and how they affect society and individuals. For Marx, these political economists have failed to realize their partial knowledge because they have assumed that the concepts like property, profit, and workers have been around since the beginning of time and are natural. So Marx goes on to explain what labor is in relation to humans, which political economists hadn't done. For Marx, the worker has a terrible position in the economy. Marx says that the more the worker produces, the poorer the worker becomes in relation to the employer. Marx continues to explain the human aspects of the worker by pointing out that when the worker is working, their labor creates a product, and that product now contains their labor. For Marx, this means that a part of the worker has been put into an object. Marx interprets this as a piece of the worker now no longer belongs to the worker. For Marx, a part of the worker is now alien to the worker. Since this is the case, the more work the worker does, the more of herself she loses, or, to use his language, the more she works, the more alienated she becomes to herself. While this might seem to be a pointless argument, it becomes clearer when Marx points out that the time one spends working for someone else making a product, the less time they can spend doing what they want, which would be developing or cultivating their self. Here's a quote from Marx. Quote, "Whatever the product of his labor is, he is not. Therefore, the greater his product, the less he is he himself." Marx says, let's take a closer look at this. Marx says that in order to make something, the worker needs the physical world to make products. For example, trees become wood. Since this is the case, the worker uses the physical world to make money to buy food to sustain the worker. For Marx, this is unnecessary since the worker could skip the step of producing and just use the land for sustenance. For Marx, this means that the worker becomes a slave because in order to survive, the worker needs to create a product. As a result, the more the worker produces, the less there is to consume. For Marx, political economy doesn't see this because it doesn't regard how the economy affects the worker as a human. Marx states that so far we have only considered the worker in regards to the physical world, but now we need to consider the worker in relation to the act of doing work. For Marx, since a product is an object that embodies a piece of the human, then the act of creating the process is the act of taking part of the human. In his language, Marx says work is the process of alienating man from himself. For Marx, since labor is an external part of the worker, it is not part of the worker's human essence. Therefore, when one is a worker, one is doing something that is not for oneself. For Marx, working for a paycheck is just a way to be yourself when you leave work. He said if labor was really a part of us, we wouldn't be eager to end work. The product of work is not the worker's product, but the property of the employer, and this fact affirms working for a boss is alienation from ourselves. Since the majority of the day is spent working, the only time we feel human, according to Marx, is when we are eating, drinking, or procreating. Marx states that so far he has argued that the commodity of a worker creates or alienates the worker from herself, and the act of working for someone else is the process of alienating oneself from their true self. Since this is the case, Marx says we are estranged from ourselves, or we are no longer being ourselves. Marx goes on to say there is a third aspect of this labor that estranges us. Marx says that humans are a species being. This means that when we are existing, we are being human, or we are free to do whatever we feel like doing. For Marx, estranged labor is regarded as a means of living. We work so we can eat. But for Marx, to exist is not the same as being an authentic human, or what he calls species being. Therefore, we are wrong to assume that labor allows us to be real humans. All it does is allow us to stay alive. For Marx, what we do is who we are. Therefore, estranged labor means that we are just creatures who try to exist. For Marx, only when a human produces a product that they want to produce does a human duplicate their self. But when we do it under estranged labor, we lose ourself. What Marx is getting at is that estranged labor, or working for someone else, estranges man from himself. Marx says that when we are estranged from ourselves, we become estranged from others, because we can only see people the way we see ourselves. In conclusion, Marx says if we are alienated from ourselves by creating a product, then who does our self belong to? For Marx, our authentic self belongs to those who employ us because they own the commodities we produce. If alienation from ourselves is wretched, then owning the embodiment of ourselves is joyous. For Marx, anytime we do that, someone else wants. For Marx, anytime we do what someone else wants, we are estranging ourselves from ourselves. Lastly, Marx ends by saying that the result of alienated labor is private property.